This episode of Untold Stories is sponsored by Ledin.io. You'll hear more about them later on in this episode. What is up, everyone? I am Charlie Shrem, and you are listening and watching Untold Stories, where twice a week together we get to dive deep with some of crypto's most influential leaders to understand how this movement really came to be. And today was one of those days where I woke up at like 4 a.m. I looked at the price. I saw the price of Bitcoin was at a certain number. And then this morning I woke up and I didn't bother to check the price because I checked it a few hours earlier. And it was one of those days where the price was down like 10% in a few hours, all because of some fear, uncertainty, and doubt that Bloomberg recycled some 5-year-old news that China was banning Bitcoin. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about a lot of other subjects that are pertaining to the day, Bitcoin, previous history, current day, and where we're going in the future, what these platforms and these blockchains are building and doing. And today, I'm very excited to have Sarson Funds, Jahon Jamali. You are the Chief Marketing Officer at Sarson Funds. We've actually had John Sarson on the show before. It's good to have you guys consistently on the show because you guys are a macro fund. You're an independent provider of blockchain technology and cryptocurrency marketing. You guys were the first among U.S. cryptocurrency managers to directly address the concerns of financial advisors by also focusing on education for both the advisor and the client. And now you guys are huge. Thank you for continuing to do what you do. And now you're writing a book called Deep Crypto, and anyone can check it out at discoverdeepcrypto.com. Jahon, you were not only the CMO of, well, first of all, thank you so much for coming on Untold Stories.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Charlie. It's a pleasure. It's always great to speak with you.
You worked at some venture-backed startups like Kapow and the Appraisal Lane, but very cool, you were a former U.S. intelligence officer at the Defense Intelligence Agency. And maybe you can give us a little bit of insight into, does our government actually use mainstream media as a tool to kind of control the narrative of the day? Is that a conspiracy theory, or does that actually happen? Is that a documented thing?
Well, control is an interesting word to use. I mean, if you want to say control, you're giving a lot of credit to the apparatus of government and being
True
able
story.
to coherently do something, which inherently is really not the case. I think what you find is that, we're in this era, especially in the post 9/11 era, where the traditional concept of the nation state system, the nation state order of how the globe is organized, is really starting to change very rapidly. And you have this conglomeration of media and corporate America and lobbyist groups that influence lawmakers. And it gets muddy. It really, really does. And it's hard to really discern, where truth is derived from. I was an intelligence officer, and seeking truth was, sort of like at the core of what we were trying to do individually in the field. But, we live in the era of fake news,
Yeah, we
and
do.
government is not immune to that, even amongst itself. And I think that for folks to think there's a coordinated effort in the government is really to maybe give the government too much credit and like its ability to coherently do something. But what draws me to blockchain in this era is that blockchain can solve the global trust deficit in a lot of interesting ways. And a lot of our institutions, our own government itself, is wrestling and grappling with that challenge. And there's a lot of fear in there. There's a lot of old institutions that stand to lose if they don't understand really the implications behind it. And that was when John and I started Sarson Funds. That was one of the things that we cued in on, is that we wanted to challenge the cryptocurrency community to do a better job about educating. And that's really where the gap was. There was this huge knowledge gap between the technology innovators and Wall Street and Washington. And the gap was huge. And they weren't even speaking the same language. Technologists have this mantra, or sometimes this feeling, that if you build something great, people should just flock to it. Well, Wall Street goes to no man, and neither does Washington, D.C. And this was going to take some education in a way that was digestible and understandable, and in a way that was also framed as being consistent with American ideals, historical American ideals of freedom of information, freedom of thought, innovation. And I think that a lot of folks are misinterpreting, the concept of America and blockchain as being, mutually exclusive. They're not. There is nothing more American than Bitcoin. It's as American as apple pie. I've said it before, and I'm going to continue to beat that drum, that we stand to really gain as a society as we start to understand this and embrace it rather than run from it.
I think I've heard Bitcoin is apple pie from you, and then I've used that term and have asked since we had since hearing that quote, I've been having some politicians on the show, future senators and congresswomen and congressmen and everything, and mayors and multiple mayors and down to city commissioners, and I'll always repeat that Bitcoin is as American as apple pie, and they all agree. They all agree, especially if they understand it. Especially if they understand it, it's like one of the most American things that can possibly come out of the last 50 years because freedom and liberty are not free and require sacrifice. And so there is a lot of sacrifice going on here. But at the same time, what's happening is you're right. And I like the term that you use. We're solving the global trust deficit. I've never heard this before. I never heard of that term. Did you coin that? Where did that come from? And what does it mean?
Well, that's something that we decided that really was pure and at the core of the blockchain value proposition, and we coined that about 2.5 years ago in some of our presentations of explaining to financial advisors specifically what blockchain was doing. Everybody understood it was a great technology, and some folks had the understanding of the differences between a centralized network and a decentralized network and a trusted third party versus not needing one. But they didn't understand, what does this do? Like, what is the net result? What is the positive here? And that is the positive. When you have trust built into the protocol, that really can solve a lot of the problems that we're having right now, because
Why?
we do have this global trust deficit.
I
Well,
like
you know,
trusting you. You want to trust me. Human relationships, psycho relationships are all built on trust.
as we've grown and this human network has grown, people have access to information in ways they've never had before historically. This type of information, like news and higher education and access to like deep analysis, this was reserved for highly educated folks, right? Highly educated, or folks that were in government, or like if you look back, and I take a several 100-year view of this.
Yeah.
This type of knowledge was locked away to like an elite group of society members. Now it's accessible to everybody. And what has happened is the intermediaries in between those traditional columns of brokerage of info, right? Your news outlets, they are faced with two things: a changing business model in which click results in revenue. So they need to adjust in order to survive. But at the same time, so many people have access to independent information that they're beginning to see that those arbiters of info, those brokers of information and data, aren't always right. And that their motivations are more in line with the
Oh,
business model rather than providing with people with info, because info is accessible to anybody now, with an internet connection. So this is what's causing this mayhem. You have these traditional outlets of trust that have deviated and changed and altered the way in which they message and report and provide info to a business model they can't keep up with. At the same time, you have people being able to access information for themselves
there's a
and being
huge deficit of trust across everything.
oh, absolutely. And this is coming to light too in government. People are beginning to see that money and dark money and political campaign contributions are really what is driving decisions at the policy level, and that it's maybe even not their elected officials that are making decisions. Elected officials, especially in Congress, I worked in Congress before I was at DIA. Their knowledge depth needs to be like a mile wide and an inch deep. If people realize that most bills are written and pushed through and promoted by 25, 26-year-old staffers, they would be appalled. But that's very much the case. That's very much the fact. Most senators, most Congress people don't read even the legislation they vote on. And it's so laden with pork and special interest money. And now that's starting
Yeah.
to come to light. People can find this information out for themselves. Of course, there's going to be this mistrust.
Are we at a crossroads in where we go as it in regards to democratic societies? Because socialists and communists will point to this and say, look, this is happening and it's dark. and it's so bad. Therefore, we need to, society should be run this way. But the crypto folk and the Bitcoiners and in the past 10, all of us kind of are saying, look, this is happening, but we can take all of this, like this is just because this is happening is a failure of the trust mechanism, not the system itself. And if we can solve the trust mechanism or remove the ability for me to say we have to trust that staffer or his motivations or her motivations, then we can actually be in an amazing society that's fully decentralized.
Absolutely. And I think also the trust needs to work in the other direction. Elected officials in government.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
They need to trust the people to a degree. And we forgot about that somewhere down the road. And like all great American innovations and changes, it's not going to start from the top down. You were talking about locally elected officials and local politicians that you've been talking to that are in agreement with you. It's going to start from the bottom up. And this is where I think the crypto community needs to start to organize itself a little bit better and making sure that we're reaching those touch points at the grassroots level. Mayor Miami, right? There's a couple other, there's mayor of, I think, Jackson, Tennessee.
Yeah, Sarasota, where I live, the mayor of Sarasota also loves Bitcoin. We're a small town, 100,000 people, but he's my friend and he loves Bitcoin too. So he wants me to add him to the list.
When you see these local officials start to make positive changes in their local communities, that's how things happen. That's how great things happen in this country, from the bottom up, from the communities to the states up, not from the top down. It's never worked well from the top down. That's not how we're architected. We're a republic. A lot of people forget that and kind of yearn for this strong centralized government and fall for that narrative. But that's not the case. One of the things I point to, I'm a big history buff, and there's this concept in American political science called American exceptionalism, right? What makes America so different?
Yeah, it's what's that term where we can go to this from sea to sea? We were allowed to go. It's like an ethocentrism.
It was manifest destiny.
Manifest destiny. Is that kind of the same thing?
Right. That was there's a couple arguments of like, okay, what makes America so special, right? One of it is we have this frontier expansion, this manifest destiny, that capability. There's another argument that says, well, we have a lack of historical nobility. There's no like birthright aristocracy here in the United States, right? Like they have in Europe.
Like, most of the world has some, yeah.
Right. Here it's economic, right? But like, in Europe, you're born a duke, and like your family goes back to like 600 AD or something where your nobility came from. We didn't have that here either. But I think one of the biggest distinctions, and this is where blockchain can thrive in a transnational environment and really push forward American values, is the fact that America was an idea before it was a country. Before we became a nation, it was an idea. It was conceived of, it was conceptualized, it was documented, it was debated over, and then it came into formation. That has never happened anywhere else like that before. It usually rose up and evolved over, whether it was a village to a monarchy to some other type of mechanism. But here it was actually thought about first. And it was a collection of independent states that came together and said, once they had a common enemy,
sure,
and were able to, join or die and craft the concept of what this could be. And I think blockchain and the crypto community needs to take note and a little bit of historical advice here. We're at this point now. You have China banning Bitcoin again for the millionth time this morning, and then you have also similar draconian measures happening in Kentucky, where they've issued Celsius with an emergency cease and desist, right? We're at this point now where we can't afford as a crypto community to be so tribalistic. Just like the states, the early colonies could not afford to be so tribalistic in the 1700s, late 1700s. We're at that point too, where it's a join or die. We can't have Bitcoin maximalists and like this altcoin community and that altcoin community or the DeFi proponents all be like so separated. We're a digital asset ecosystem, and blockchain is the path forward. We need to start putting those differences aside so we can collectively utilize our and leverage our resources here to reach those local politicians, get to those local stores, make some real impact. Because at some point in time, we're going to want to promote and help support pro-crypto politicians get into office.
Yeah.
This is where we start.
We've done those those states were infighting with each other before they were strong enough to finally come together and then do this. So I do agree with you. And I've been so against tribalism, although, you know, I have my own belief when it comes to Bitcoin and decentralization and everything else. I'm no maximalist. I don't believe in tribalism or maximalism. I'm very against it. And I'm very happy to say that over the last 2 years, it really has become very, very fringe. Now, you can be someone who loves Bitcoin and say that Bitcoin is the only sound money, the only sovereign money, the only fully decentralized, blockchain that really exists today. That's really the only one of the only ones that is probably not, overtakeable, and still want to invest and be involved and advise and like just have fun with all these other first layers and tokens and blockchains and things like that, as long as you're honest and kind of upfront about it. But I think that now we're also big enough that everyone's comfortable with kind of who they are. Bitcoin is comfortable with what it is. Everything else is kind of comfortable with where it fits into with Bitcoin. I think there was always the hostility, and I believe that maximalism actually came from the altcoiner world, starting from when Ethereum wanted to launch on top of Bitcoin, and then that was pushed away, but at the same time, and then there was the whole scaling war and things like that. It really is, that pie is growing. You're right, though. We need to stop the fighting, and it has been going away.
No, I mean it has been subsiding, but it's something that can creep up very, very easily, right? And we need to look at the blockchain ecosystem as like an entire universe that's still growing.
Yeah.
There's going to be a stratification of these assets. And just because I believe one thing is great for my best store of value doesn't mean that there's a completely different thing that I don't think also can be value represented in another way. Like,
I
I
like
have
that
my,
way of putting it.
yeah, like you have your money now that you transact with, but that's not like what your long-term savings mechanism. And that's not like, you can also view a physical piece of real estate as having value, but like they're not all represented with the same protocol necessarily the best way. So like you're going to see this stratification across digital assets where, hell, Bitcoin might be your long-term store of value, but like you're not going to buy a pack of gum with it necessarily. Maybe you use Dogecoin for something like that, or something that's like fun, or like that could be like a community money for like a rewards program, right? There's all sorts of ways in which value is expressed,
Sure.
and that really speaks to the potential diversification of digital assets.
I guess the maximalist would respond to that and say, you do your real estate token, and I'm excited for securitized real estate, tokenized real estate. It's going to be amazing. But the maximalist would say, if it's not on Bitcoin or on some, you know, platform that's like very far along on the path to decentralization, then when you do it on a blockchain that can be, as the Chinese government says, programmable. Oh no, actually it was the American government, the New York Times say programmable. No, it was the Bank of England that needs
Right.
blockchains to be programmable. If they're programmable where they can be frozen, reverse, then the maximalist will say, what's the point of doing it at all? What's the point of doing tokenized real estate if that same tokenized real estate can be frozen? In fact, a lot easier than freezing, your house, because you can still live in your house. So it's like a give and take, it's like, but there's a perfect harmonial balance. And that's where you guys educate and invest, because that balance is very, very important, I feel like.
No, it is important, and we try to express that across some of our investment products and strategies on the investment management side, is to give a breadth of
Yeah.
diversification across the asset class. You know, if you were to invest in like internet companies like 20 years ago, and you thought that MySpace was going to be like the best and brightest, you would have lost. So like it's an evolving space, and technology does
Yeah.
nothing but disrupt itself. So it's important to understand what's new. It's important to understand the different the different use cases and what is emergent as a best of breed in different types of use cases, like IoT, for instance, self-driving cars. Right? Are you going to use the Bitcoin network to pass back and forth that type of information? If you have a self-driving car, right, you need
Yeah.
immutable information received from the car in front of you. That car needs to be receiving immutable information in real time from all sorts of different data points while you're moving. There's
Yeah.
a blockchain solution to that,
Yeah.
right? And like those types of ecosystems are developing, and like who
But it
knows how
needs
these are
to
going to be
be
layered on top of each other.
it needs to be something like that. And what I'll be sitting here at episode 15,000 telling you, before you buy that car, tell me what blockchain that's on. tell me what protocol that's on. Because if it's on a protocol that is proven in the past, or we know, or anyone who does the work can be controlled by a few people, or is it one like I'm invested in um projects that are actually like KYC chains, but they are run by federations of people or main nets, you know? So it's like here are chains that actually are KYC chains. They are AML chains. They are chains where you have to put up your documentation to actually transact on them. But that's like, it's a, you know, that that's what you're getting, you know? But actually, I wanted to ask you before I forget, because you're an institution and um, you probably talked to a lot of other institutions. Are they investing in things like Avalanche, Solana, you know, like First Layer, Siri Network, all these other things, or are they still dabbling in like the ones that are on Coinbase?
I think some of the larger institutions are still dabbling in what they can see and feel on like a major place like Coinbase, but there are a number of emergent and maybe not so well known institutions that are very much interested in like the Solanas of the world, and so we're starting to see that demand start to creep up, which we're happy about. It means what that tells me is that people are starting to learn when they start to like get
Yeah.
beyond like the traditional like large coin cryptocurrencies.
Today's show is brought to you by our newest sponsor, Ledin.io, a better home for your Bitcoin. And they are amazing. They're secure, simple, and such an easy to use platform for managing and growing your digital wealth. You can earn interest on your Bitcoin and your USDC with some of the industry's best rates, 6.1% APY on your first two Bitcoin and 9% APY on your USDC. You can use your Bitcoin as collateral with their Ledin loans to get quick access to dollars, or to double your Bitcoin savings with their popular B2X loan. If it sounds too good to be true, it's not, because they've partnered with Armanino LLP to provide proof of reserve attestations. That means in a few simple clicks, you can log in and you can verify your assets on Ledin are fully accounted for. And this is truly first-in-class transparency and accountability. And I'm excited to get to the meat of what we're talking about here. We're giving $50 away in free Bitcoin to everyone. All you got to do is go to untoldstories.link/LEDN. And we're giving $50 to anyone who goes on and creates a new loan. And that can literally pay for your interest in the first half of the year, depending on the size of your loan. It's an interest-free loan. Why not? Might as well do it, right? Untoldstories.link/Ledin. Thank you guys for being amazing. The Economist Magazine just published like a special whole section. I actually got a physical. I didn't even know I was physically subscribed to them. I still get it. It was great. It was like down the DeFi rabbit hole, and it was the perils and promise of decentralized finance. And I'm like, wow, this is a global magazine that regulators, freaking probably the Duke of England is reading it. You know, Queen of England is probably reading it too. So here we go. And I read it, and it was actually I was very impressed by how balanced it was. But what are the major things that regulators and government officials are still failing to grasp now in 2021? What frustrates you? What are you like, it's annoying that I still have to explain this over and over again?
They don't understand, and there are some government agencies that do very much understand this, like ones that I might have had some experience with professionally in the past.
The SEC
that understand
does, for sure.
and like that understands this is the most, like Bitcoin particularly, is the most transparent payment network in history. And a lot of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt stems from the fact that folks think it's used for illicit purposes, and that's the bulk of what it's used for. And I use sort of my previous experience in the intelligence community, and also with the relationships I still have with the intel community and with law enforcement, to really make the case cogently that you'd have to be an idiot of a criminal network to want to use cryptocurrencies as your medium. The stats don't don't back it up. The currency of choice still for crime in the world is the fiat dollar, and it's much easier to launder cash than it is to launder cryptocurrency. So I think we're starting to make headway against that argument, because that's the easiest thing that regulators really cue in on. It's like nobody wants to facilitate dirty money. No one wants to facilitate terrorism or criminal activity. And we need to make a better case for how actually with blockchain technology and with Bitcoin, it's really much easier to protect investors and consumers than really what we've let the reputation become. And I think we're making headway on that, but it's just taken some time.
Consumer protection is the overreaching, for better a lot of the times, kind of like government mandate, right? That allows the government to, on a federal level, to come in and from the grandmas to me and you to everyone, be consumer protection. In fact, the new chairman of the SEC, Gary Gensler, is paying a lot of Twitter ads talking about how the SEC is protecting us consumers, consumer protection. Is that the right way to go about it? You think this new SEC next few years is going to be beneficial for us because he is so brilliant and he understands Bitcoin and crypto to a level where he taught it? Or you think that'll be a net negative for us?
Well, my concern is always when folks leave, like academia or leave the private sector and become a bureaucrat. That sometimes sometimes
Yeah,
they
why
shift.
do they do that?
It's a good question. It's a good question. We have a lot of very powerful unelected officials in our country.
Is it like the movies where, the president will call and be like, we need you to serve the country. I need you as SEC chair or something like that?
Oftentimes, and you can get really cynical about it too, unfortunately. And what I hope to see out of the SEC is less of a PR campaign and more of a proactive dialogue. We need to be having these conversations. He needs to be talking to Coinbase. We need to have these conversations in the open. There's a lot of educating that needs to be done on both sides, right? The industry needs to know how to address these concerns, and we need to have that dialogue going on. I think they would be best served to really open up the communication lines a bit more with the crypto industry. But the trouble is, and what frustrates me is like the crypto industry can't out meme this. Right? We can't get too cynical and continue to be wise asses in our responses because that's not going to get anywhere. We need to be cogent and really thorough in how we express and understand. It's going to be frustrating at times,
It is.
but we're not going to win a meme war. That's not going to be the pathway to success here.
Don't you think Brian Armstrong and this Coinbase team did everything they could to avoid how it ended up being? No one wants to go head to head with the SEC. It's like no one wants to go in a duel battle with Ultra, or whatever it is. You never want to be in a sword duel. So at the end of the day, so why? So I want to understand how that bubbled up so badly to the surface. And really, like, this is a stupid question, but if the SEC is now the American Consumer Protection Agency, which it seems like it is from all facets, from crypto to securities to everything, which again, I'm not advocating against, shouldn't it be an elected position? Shouldn't the whole SEC, all the chairmen be, or chairwomen, there should be more chairwomen too, be elected officials?
Well, we should probably have a lot more elected officials, but unfortunately, ultimately he reports to the Treasury Secretary, and the Treasury Secretary is not an elected official.
Yeah,
correct. So one of the things that we really need to cue in on is like the larger financial apparatus of federal regulatory bodies in the United States, and there is still an enormous amount of pressure from a lot of those high level appointed officials that are coming still from their network, their background, their previous experience working for traditional financial institutions that have a lot to lose in this game, and that have been also very good about keeping the FUD moving. So that's where I get back to these local stories and working with local governments. It's really hard to push back against a collection of grassroots success stories. And the more that the crypto community can dive into what's going on locally, especially with local elected government officials, the more success we're going to have in this, because it's going to be a very hard argument for the federal government to make, to keep on making that this is bad, right? And that there's all sorts of things that need to be protected. So it does. It starts at the ground level. We need to be much more cognizant about that. We're not going to fight a head-on battle from the top. It's going to come from underneath. So what Coinbase really and larger folks in the industry need to start doing is starting to really work with state governments, starting to work with local governments, because that's where the groundswell of support is going to eventually come from.
What's the relationship between who's responsible for that? Because you have the developers and what made us great as crypto folk is how fast we can develop new ideas and put them down and conceptualize them and then create the social experiment that involves hundreds of thousands of people, holding this token on the next day. I mean, it's a complicated relationship between developers, lawyer, businesses. You're the institution. Is it your job? And then you guys educate and invest in other things. Is it their jobs? It's a very complicated. Is it my job? Whose job is it?
It's everyone's job, because now what we've seen, this is political, and politics and success in politics is not the same as success in developing an application. Success in politics follows some very old rules.
Like what?
Personal relationships, and we need to be better about building. At the end of the day, someone whose hand we can shake and look in the eye. And this is where we need to continue to broaden the community beyond developers, beyond the business owners, and we need to start creating our own political elements, ones that aren't on the fringe, ones that are inclusive by nature, and ones that are geared towards educating. Because we're going to have to educate policymakers, we're going to have to educate the public, we're going to have to educate candidates. So we need to really start to think as a community how we can best support political organization, how we can best support keeping track of this. And we can do this in so many different ways.
You have to play by their rules. And I in the past, when you want to do that and you play by their rules over time, you get encumbered in the system, and the system itself becomes bigger for you than whatever you were for before you came into it. And luckily, Bitcoin and crypto is a big enough thing that it transcends you wanting to be part of the system. But I still struggle with the hook, because I know local politicians and I'm friends with them, but I don't know what to say. I don't know how to get pro crypto policy. Do I airdrop tokens to the whole city? Do you create voting mechanisms? Do you build like affordable housing? Like what's the way to keep the narrative pro us, I guess is what I'm saying, on a local level?
Local use cases, local town halls, local forums, bring people together.
I
In
like
every
that.
community here in the United States, there's a very diverse group of people that hold crypto. And they are laborers, they're trade union folks, electricians, business owners, dentists. Get them all in a room together and discuss. Get them all in a room together and talk about, hey, these are some like very basic day-to-day use cases. Maybe it's not going to result in some like definitive action and like, hey, look, maybe we put the library system on the blockchain, right? Maybe it doesn't result in that, but it gets the conversation going. It says, okay, we understand that this is great, but how has it helped me? Get to that personal level, because then it starts to transcend the politics, right? How has crypto affected me? How do I see it as a plumber? How do I see it as a teacher? How do I see it as like a parent, right? I think of my own community here. I live just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, in a coastal town, and it's a small town, less than 30,000 people. And there's a lot of working class folks here. You'd be surprised how many have crypto and how many have been in crypto for a very long time. And it's a really diverse group. And like otherwise they wouldn't really have a lot of common things to talk about, but it's all affected them differently. So we need to start having those personal conversations. And that's where it starts. That's when politicians start to listen, because those are registered voters at the end of the day.
If we can start from the local level and really explaining, I think even explaining this concept of like how blockchain is solving the global trust deficit, because any politician has to trust someone else. These handshake backroom deals, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. It's a
Yeah,
constant
and
frustration.
it is. And here's the other thing too, is like Bitcoin's a powerful force for freedom. There's a billion people in the world that are unbanked, that are going to have access and have a savings mechanism that they haven't had before. And you know what? Some of those people are here in the United States, right? A lot of folks have watched their savings get eroded in its purchasing power.
Yeah.
Not everybody owns stock, securities, or real estate, but they feel desperate now. Now here's a mechanism, young student. Here's a mechanism, single mom, that you can put like whatever you have that's a little bit, maybe you can put away, right? So maybe it's those types of organizations and those types of conversations that can be had that really get to somebody's day-to-day problem.
It's really sad. I read a statistic actually that said that, yeah, hooray, hooray, the average American net worth rose by like 17% last year as long as I held real estate and stocks. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know anyone who, like most of my friends, I'm only 30, like unless you're in crypto, you don't own any real estate yet. Um, you don't own any stocks. Uh, okay. It just screwed over like everyone. And
Yeah,
so,
it did.
yeah, stimulus
And
was
I'm,
really bad. All of that. Like we basically took 2009 and said, we don't want people to suffer. So let's make most suffer and some not have to. And the
where we
ones who
can
make
start
the
to,
rules, yeah, it sucks. Sorry.
no, I was gonna say, where we can start to like have aid organizations, community organizations, maybe even a program like WIC, right? Women, infants, and children, which provides like subsidy amounts for necessities and groceries, where we
Sure.
can start to utilize maybe crypto and start to get them to think about it. I think we'll really, really start to make some headway where folks can see a little bit of a difference. And as the space matures too, we'll see less volatility. But I think there's plenty of volatility on the downside for purchasing power of their dollar that people are starting to really, wake up a little bit. So like, again, it's those town hall conversations, it's those
Those are the most
community
important ones.
dialogues.
Yep.
Absolutely. Is when you start to see, and then then the crypto community will start to learn what the messaging should be, because they're going to hear it not from themselves in the echo chamber of Twitter. They're going to hear it from like the construction worker who's
Maybe I
been
should do that.
taking a portion of his salary and just putting it into something since, putting it into, Bitcoin or whatever since 2017. And then all of a sudden he's like, holy shit, I have a little bit of savings now. And I was able to do X, Y, and Z with it. I was able to like get my kid into that sports program, or I was able to do something where I didn't feel like I was just constantly working for less and less money.
So the beauty of it
Right.
too is that you don't need permission either. So if you have savings and you hold stocks or real estate and you want to use those tools to further your life, to buy more real estate, to borrow against it, to grow your net worth, to start a business, you need permission. You need a good credit score. You go, I want to borrow if you own $1 million house, you want to borrow $100,000 against it. You still need a good credit score. And if you're not part of that system, which most people aren't, I'm not part of that system anymore, you can't access any of those tools anymore. But the beauty now, if you're holding Bitcoin or a crypto that represents something like we've talked about, some tokenized asset, in seconds. I was explaining this to a friend of mine who wants to borrow against a Bitcoin for a down payment on his house. I was like, you don't need to do it now. Don't start paying interest today. That when you have the house and you need to send them the wire for closing, that's when you take the loan out against your Bitcoin, because it can be done in seconds. Beautiful.
And the more we can start to like drive some of those stories home, I think the more success we're going to have. So
I
like
love it.
ultimately, Charlie, it's our responsibility individually. And it's our responsibility to have these conversations at the ground level and to then start to like use that momentum and start to have those conversations with our local officials who oftentimes might themselves be holding crypto as well, right?
Most of
This is
them
where it
are.
starts. It does. All great changes start from the grassroots.
All great changes start with grassroots. Before I forget, no, I had a guest the other day and he said exactly what you were saying was right now you have all these politicians and civil servants and things like that own crypto directly, but soon it's going to be indirectly through institutions and funds and pensions and retirement and things like that slowly. And they're going to wake up and realize it because they're going to see it on random statements or books and records that, oh, they in fact own a piece of a crypto company or own some crypto directly. And like, oh shit, now this is my money now. And so here we go. Everything's going to change. And it's a beautiful thing.
No, it is. And actually, I make this argument all the time that this is actually where financial advisors can be a hero here. There's a lot in the
Yep.
a lot of folks in the crypto community that like, cue in on wealth managers because they feel like they're going to be disintermediated. And to a degree, maybe that there's some truth in that. But really, my dad is not going to put $100,000 onto something on his phone.
It's
That's
true.
just a fact. But he's already has a trusted relationship. There's a little bit of trust left in America. Most Americans, especially
That's
affluent
true.
Americans, trust their financial advisors still. It's usually a multi-year relationship. When you manage someone's money, you're going to develop trust over time. Financial advisors, and that's our hallmark at Sarson Funds, is to educate them, are going to be viewed by a lot of Americans as the resource on this. So the more they can get an understanding, more financial advisors get an understanding of how to explain this to a client, because they know what their clients' retirement goals are. They know how to, like, what their financial plans are. The more they're going to be able to integrate that. So believe it or not, your everyday local financial advisor has the opportunity, if they want to seize on it, to be the hero here for a lot of Americans in getting access to cryptocurrency.
Thank you so much for taking the time and coming on Untold Stories. In fact, actually, I had a financial advisor and we're still friends, but he left. He left the trust bank that he was with to go work for a Bitcoin company.
Well, hopefully he can spread that knowledge back to some of his old peers and colleagues.
He did. He's great. He's surfing now. He's in LA surfing all the time. He gets his great life. He's really happy. But we're
Good
still
for
friends.
him.
This is great. Jahon, thank you so much for coming on Untold Stories today. Sarson Funds. I love having you guys back on every like 6 months and it's great that we continue doing it because you're out there doing everything that you talked about that we need to do. You're out there doing. So it's great to hear back on what needs to be happening and everything like that. Appreciate you taking the time today. And thanks for everyone for listening to Untold Stories. I love it. I love you guys. This was like my episode 230 something probably. So I love my job. Thank you. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you very much, Charlie.